Remember, watchers, to win Captain America's shield, you need to like this video, subscribe to the Marvelous Wave, and leave us a comment telling us who your favorite Marvel villain is. Then head over to Twitter and tweet us at @StupendoussWave with hashtag the Marvelous Wave. The winner will be announced on March 19th with the first episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Earlier this week, Wandavision's director, Matt Shakman, said in an interview how an angry, anonymous fan texted him saying, "Didn't you guys learn from Iron Man 3 and the fake Mandarin?" To which he thought, "My first takeaway was how that was my favorite part of Iron Man 3. He then went on to explain his love for Ben Kingsley's portrayal of Trevor, the fake Mandarin, and how he was inspired to use a similar method with Evan Peters' Pietro, or FIETRO, if you will. And he also mentions that although we were given a fake Mandarin in the past, very soon we will see the real Mandarin in Shang-Chi and our patience will be rewarded. And this was an obvious hint that we may see Quicksilver again, especially because he also makes mention of the Multiverse of Madness and the recent news of the Mutants as an official first movie focusing on mutants in the MCU. Overall, this covers an interesting topic in the MCU, especially because there is a wide variety of fans that exist, and everyone is trying to make guesses of what's going to happen next. While it did hurt a bit that fans of Quicksilver and the X-Men version of him ended up just being Ralph, a guy that will likely never show up again, as his main purpose was to be used for his home, some intel, and a bad joke. But if you look at it, he did have an even bigger storytelling role, mainly that of a distraction, and once I heard the explanation, I understood the purpose and agreed with its use. One of the first things all of us as fans need to remember is that the MCU is not the comics. It is going to be different in many ways from all the stories we have read over the years. They will be taking from some parts, changing others, and ignoring some parts completely. But the great thing about the MCU is that although most of these stories are at the whim of writers, directors, actors, and more, we as fans will never stop guessing and theorizing what we will see next in the MCU. And this is, in a way, what many of those who make these stories want from us. By dropping hints, sneaking in Easter eggs, and even using certain actors, especially in WandaVision's case, they keep us guessing so that when the story finally drops, we will be guessing at every turn and end up surprised when it is finally concluded. They constantly play with our expectations, using twists and turns to shape the story to something that makes us think. And Matt Shakman and Jack Schaefer and all of those who worked on WandaVision did this very well, keeping us guessing and then leaving everything open for the story to continue. Ralph, or Fietro as he will be now known, is a perfect example of setting expectations and changing the role of a plot point from what fans think is the obvious choice to something completely different. Fietro at first glance was first thought to be a few different things. Quicksilver from Fox's X-Men universe somehow entering into the MCU to help his sister's doppelganger. Mephisto in disguise looking to steal the twins or use Wanda, or even a crude copy of Quicksilver returned from the dead. None of these turned out to be true. As we learned in the last episode, he is Ralph, and he is just a random guy who is under Agatha's crystalline possession. He was just a poor bystander who got used to manipulate Wanda and us. For Wanda, Shakman described his purpose as a metaphor for what grief does to us that allows us to accept a face that is unfamiliar to us. As for us fans on the outside looking in, knowing this familiar face and knowing that it filled similar shoes in another franchise, it was both a play on the sitcom trope of constant recast and the comic trope of constantly bringing the dead back to life. Again, we saw the same thing in Iron Man, and not just 3, but the first one as well. Part of this may have been because Iron Man was more of its own movie with minor references that didn't even have an MCU to build its world around. To some extent, they tried to connect Iron Man's story to the real world, making the Ten Rings a terrorist organization that would fade into the background after the third entry. They would work more actively against Iron Man in the first and the third movies, and even show up in a demonstration of the Yellow Jacket suit by Darren Cross and Ant-Man as associates of Hydra. For the most part, they have little purpose and almost no tie-ins to the comics. The most we get is that their supposed creator is the Mandarin, who by the end of Iron Man 3 is thought to be Aldrin Killiach after Trevor Slattery is outed as a fraud in Killian's employ. And a large part of this is there is not a Ten Rings organization in the comics, but literally 10 rings that the Mandarin uses to power himself and aid his villainy. And on top of this, the Mandarin, both Trevor and Killian were frauds, as the real Mandarin is rumored to make his appearance in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This doesn't mean that the terrorist organization won't have tie-ins to Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings. or that the Mandarin title wasn't inspired by the original creator, and possibly even a search for the Ten Rings. Either way, it's taken years to finally get to its comic inspiration, but then again, they may not mention this organization again at all, although they likely will. In Iron Man, these are nothing more than Easter eggs, hints at stories that could have formed but never did once the MCU was brought together. Or they were just new versions that the MCU wanted to tell at the time. Just like FIETRO, lies were told to keep us guessing, and maybe there is some disappointment, but it's always nice to see a new version of the story. Although you may not agree with how some of these stories are told or how some of these characters are used, they are to some extent made in a way to fit the industry. But we as fans can look at it and see how this story is different and how it is only a precursor to greater stories to come. And with so many years of Marvel Comics and so much source material to pull from, including the imaginations of fans who made theories, fanfictions, and explanations for events that occurred and then ended up working in the MCU properties, there are near endless supplies or stories to pull from that have formed and will continue to form in the MCU. And with all of that being said, these stories are constantly being traded between different hands and creators, so it doesn't mean we won't see characters like Ralph again, especially because there were some unanswered questions at the end of Wandavision. For example, who was the person that was in witness protection that Agent Jimmy Woo was sent in to check on? Some, including us, are theorizing that it could have been Peter from X-Men universe disguised as Ralph, who somehow passed through the multiverse walls and entered into the MCU. Since he had powers akin to Quicksilver, was that just because of some illusion magic of Agatha's, or did he actually have those abilities because he is really the alternate Quicksilver? Although some of these questions are minor and it does seem a little unlikely that it will ever come up again, it would be an interesting way to go with the character, and it's not going to stop us from theorizing. What do you think about the revelation that FIETRO was simply Ralph? How do you think the MCU should tie into the comics? And since we're talking about it, what are some theories and questions that you have about past and future events in the MCU, so that maybe we can look at them together? Thank you so much for watching, my fellow watchers. Please leave your thoughts and comments below, and then please like this video and subscribe to the Marvelous Wave to assemble and join our team, and have a great day.